And now we are live.
We should talk. We
Live.
should talk about Macs because we haven't gotten any new ones yet.
What? A Mac? What? I don't
Remember
even
those?
know.
Remember those?
It's October's over. There's no Macs.
And I have this whole thing. We should talk about this because I have this whole thing that if Apple doesn't update them all every year, I'm going to start losing faith again. It's like we got a new MacBook Mini, we got a new Mac Mini. That's great. We got a new Air. Just every year update them.
That's a lot to update, and sometimes they just don't need it.
But they're like, Intel puts out new chips. If you're buying it this year, you deserve the latest chips.
Yeah, you got me on that one. Well,
Okay,
since we are now live,
okay,
let me get us started with that. Good afternoon. Today is Friday, November 8th, 2019. Today, we'll be talking about Apple and privacy, Adobe, Fitbit, possibly whether or not we're going to get any new Macs before the end of the year, and a whole lot more because this is the iMore show. Renee Ricci of Vector. How are you doing today?
I'm good because you came on Vector with me and did one hell of an AirPods Pro review.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I really like talking about headphones with you.
I know. I was really super happy. Yeah.
Yeah, we did good. High five.
Internet high five. Are you using your AirPods Pro now?
Yep, of course.
Me too.
Yep. See? Love them. Love them. Love them.
So if we can't hear each other, it's because the noise is being canceled.
If I take it out of my ear, I can't hear you anymore. I was getting a lot of questions about whether or not I should get rid of my Powerbeats Pro in exchange for AirPods. Not me specifically, but people asking that question. And so I think Powerbeats Pro are absolutely fantastic. And if you're happy with those, definitely don't get rid of them because the comparison between the two is very similar. AirPods Pro and Powerbeats Pro, the biggest difference being that Powerbeats Pro, I think, have a better sound quality, and AirPods Pro have active noise canceling. So if you really need active noise canceling, then boot your Powerbeats Pro out the window for them. But otherwise, I say keep them because they're both very comfortable. They both do all of the other awesome features with Siri and connectivity and stuff like that. So they're, I think they're both comparable, and I don't think that a person would need to upgrade from Powerbeats Pro. Yeah. So what do you think?
And also, if you like that hook, like if you're all about, I said this on the review, if you're all about that parkour, if you're all about those flips, if you're a gymnast, if you work out a lot, that's a lot of security in having that thing around your ear. And you have to want the noise canceling and not want the band about your ear. That's
and there have been just not a lot, but a few people that I've noticed just around the Twitter feeds that AirPods Pro pop out of their ears, and with that,
do they hold their nose and blow and they come popping out? That's like maybe
that would be funny. I think though, there's just certain ears that it's just that kind of setup is just not going to work for, and I do think there's a hope that there will be third-party ear cup makers that will be able to accommodate the different ear sizes and the ear structures, and
or some people like foam, maybe make foam versions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's hopefully going to be something like that in the future, so people do have alternatives.
Dodgy gray market foam.
Unlike AirPods, which don't have anything, you had to slip a silicone case over the top of it, which I tried. And the problem with that is you can't charge them then.
Artwork on top of your AirPods. It was ridiculous. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully they'll be for those people, which I can tell there's less people that can't wear AirPods Pro than there are people that can't wear AirPods. So I think it's not as big of an issue. But for those people out there, I do hope that some third-party companies come out with different shapes to help with that, because they're pretty good.
They're fun. These people self-proclaimed audiophiles, and I said this on the review too, and I don't have audiophilia. I'm the opposite. I am terrible at sound, and that's why I have to lean on you so much, Laura Gill. But the audiophiles going, they're terrible, they're good, they're fine, they're great. And I realized listening to music is like looking at art. There's not that many objective things. It's there's a lot of subjective things, and if you love them, that's great. If you don't like them, there's other stuff. Everybody can be happy in this world.
Definitely, yeah. I think, if not for my experience with music, I would say AirPods are fine. I think a lot of people are going to like the sound quality of them. They do have a good balance. They're pretty darn good, top to bottom. To me, they do need a lot more work in the quality of audio realm. I mean, think about the HomePod, right? And how even you, Renee, who's not an audiophile, you listen to that music and you're immersed in it because of the way it comes out of those HomePods. Obviously, the speaker's much better, but I'm hoping for HomePods in my ears, and I do think that Apple will get there someday. I think right now they've been spending a lot of time with making sure the technology behind it is good and working on the sound quality a bit. And I think their next step, they've done it all. So what's the next step? Make the quality of the sound a little better. I think they'll get
Babble
that.
fish. They could put little babble fish in our ears. That would be so good. Yeah. Not the ones from Wrath of Khan, the ones from Hitchhikers.
Well, I think they still go.
Yes. Oh, now I can't wear them, Lori. Thank you.
So gross. So earlier this week, Apple updated their privacy webpage. And I thought we could talk a little bit about this because Apple has marketed itself as privacy focused. And I think this has been something that they've been doing right all along. But at the same time, it puts them into that put your money where your mouth is idea with a lot of people. So on the one hand, when no one else was focusing on privacy, Apple was focusing on privacy. Nobody cared back then. They were doing it and people didn't care. And we were talking about how, your photos are kept on your device and people don't need to, put your photos in the cloud in order to figure out, what they're looking at and things like that. And Apple never did that and how much better that is. And back then nobody cared. And then people started caring, and Apple's been doing this all along. And now we're at a point where privacy is up on everybody's mind, and they really do want privacy. It is a bigger deal. And now Apple's getting flack for what they've been doing all along because there have been some things that have come up that they don't go against what Apple's positioning is, but they are set to a higher standard of scrutiny by all of us because of their dedication to privacy. And I think on the one hand, they should be, because they are touting their privacy. So we need to make sure that they stay accountable to it. But on the other hand, it's almost unfair because they do it better than everyone else. They're just getting more flack for it because they tell everybody about it. So let's kind of go into that a little bit. Let's first talk about, I think the biggest, most recent thing that came up was the sort of recognition that there were contractors listening to audio tracks of Siri in order to help improve, Siri functionality. That was kind of a big deal. A lot of people didn't know about it, even though it was part of the norm to do it. That was one of those moments where we were faced with, Apple has this privacy standard, and they're not meeting our expectations of that privacy standard.
Yeah, so I struggled with this for a while. And when all those things first came out, like when the FaceTime bug and it came out, and especially when this came out, there were a lot of people saying, well, this, just serves Apple right. They were touting themselves. They were being cocky. They were putting up those ads. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, iPhone and privacy. They were saying, what big shots they were. And it's Schadenfreude. They got what they were asking for. Maybe they shouldn't be so loud and obnoxious about it. And I was thinking if they didn't make those ads in Las Vegas, if they didn't put up those commercials, there wouldn't be the amount of blowback that there was when they get, because they have bugs, they make mistakes, they screw up like every company does. But now I think the opposite. I think I want them held to that standard. It reminds me of that James Cameron saying, I want to try so hard that even my failures are above most other people's successes. And that's what I want. I want that from every company, but realistically, a lot of business models don't allow for that. But with Apple, I want them making those cocky ads so that they are getting all that attention. They are in that spotlight. And anytime they screw up, they do get hammered, because that ultimately makes it better for me. Like, they fixed that FaceTime bug fast. They changed the way that that Siri voice grading is done fast. They're fixing those things, and there is so much attention on it. Now, I also wish that attention would transfer to other companies. I think in general, not only do they not get the same scrutiny, but they're allowed to get away with a lot. Like Facebook came out and Mark Zuckerberg said the future is all about privacy. And then he spoke about encryption, which is not the same as privacy. And Google said, we care desperately about privacy, but both of them are locking out developers and not themselves. Apple is locking out themselves. And Google is saying you can delete your data after 3 months. Like, great, 3 months after you've pillaged everything you possibly can from it. How about I don't give you the data to begin with? How about that? So I hope Apple continues. I want a ton of attention on this, and I want that attention to hit just everybody in the space.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about Apple's clarification on Siri. So there's one thing that on their privacy page, we'll link that in the show notes, that Apple talks a lot about, which is random identifiers. Can you tell me what that means? Can you give me a little bit of insight into why they're using that? Because from a skeptic's perspective, market speak and double speak, if you will, if you want to get sci-fi about it, it can lead to us misunderstanding what a company is trying to say, so that then in the future they can say, well, you didn't understand what that meant. So do you have a good understanding of what a random identifier is, and can you explain it to us?
Sure. So there's different ways that data is valuable to different companies. And so, for example, Facebook wants to build a social graph. So they don't just want to know about you, but they want to know about everyone's relationship to you, both in the digital world and in the physical world. So for them, who you are and what you're doing is important. They want to know, even if they say that you're anonymized, they still, let me back up for a minute. Anonymized isn't really anonymous, because there are so many things that can sort of pierce through that veil of anonymity. Like, they may not know that this one app is coming from your phone, but it happens to have the same IP address as this app that they do know is coming from your phone. And then it's very easy to start piecing together who you are.
Okay.
So what Apple's doing is several things. The unique identifier means that when you use Siri or you use one of these services that uses a unique identifier, instead of it being Lori's Apple ID, it randomly generates a token, and that token replaces your ID, and that token is what's sent to Apple, and it persists for a while. Like, you have to have some persistence. It can't make, in an ideal, perfect zero knowledge world, every time you ask Siri something, a new random token would be issued, so it would never know that you said the same thing in a row. But part of the value of assistance is understanding context. So if you say, what's the capital of Germany? That's a unique identifier. It goes right away to Apple, and they resolve that for you. But if you then said, what's the population? If it did another random identifier, it would have no idea what you just asked it, so it couldn't answer that question anymore.
Mm-hmm,
so because you want to have what's called sequential inference, it has to know within the realm of a conversation. So and it actually extends a little bit beyond that. It will reset on its own. They'll generate new random tokens for you every once in a while. Anytime you switch Siri on and off, it'll generate a new random token for you. So if you have like a terrible conversation and you want a blanket from the universe, you can toggle it on and off.
I have called Siri names before that I kind of wish I could delete. So that's a good thing to know.
Yeah. So the basic thing is that gives them, like, they know that, I feel like that Transformers movie, are you Loverboy 37294? Are you? And that's like yelling at him. It creates like Lori is like 98726, and it knows that this conversation was 98726, and then when it's packaged away. But next time when you're 803 double N 7, it no longer knows that that's you, and it never knows that it's you, but it also no longer knows those conversations are associated.
Okay,
that's
so
a
then
really
like
laborious way of explaining it.
Yeah, and so to like use kind of analogies, it could be like I'm in a shopping mall, and a security guard is trying to follow me around, let's say, and I walk into one store and I'm wearing a particular outfit and I have a particular hairstyle. But when I walk out of that store, I am now wearing a different hairstyle and a different shirt, so that security guard doesn't recognize that that was the same person that walks into the store.
Yes.
And maybe he'll try to follow me into the second store, but he thinks I'm someone different now. So it's kind of like that.
It's much easier to understand with Apple Pay, for example, because you don't really need continuity. So anytime you use Apple Pay, it doesn't give your card number. It gives a random card number. And then you go to the next place, you get another random card number. If you spend money twice at the same store, you get a random number each time. So the merchant doesn't even really understand that it was you buying two things unless you give it to them separately.
And let's be a little bit more clear on that, because card number can be confusing to people. I've had people ask me about this. They're not actually creating an account number, a new account number that you use. It's a number that is used for tracking purposes. So when you hand over your card, it's the same card number, but what what information is being sent to merchants is a different identifying number. So it's not attached to your card. So they can't create a profile in that store based on your shopping experiences in order to know, that you like to buy, ice cream every Friday night or something like that.
I mean, like the gross case scenario is, Lori's in there and she buys something, and the next day she gets like a bunch of like medical suggestions based on, oh, Lori bought the lactose milk. We'll send her a whole bunch of more lactose intolerance products. Is obviously now, and this stuff is serious, because there was a writer from the Daily Mirror who was on Twitter the other day, and she ended up writing it for the Daily Mirror, where she uses a cycle tracking app. Not the Apple one. She uses a commercial one, and she forgot to fill it in one month. And she started getting Facebook ads for baby products and mommy products. And then she went back and filled in that month, and it stopped. But it freaked her out, because it meant that she said that, it means that Facebook will probably know that I'm pregnant before I am. And that's not the world that I want to live in.
Yeah.
So when Apple does these sorts of things, they don't have anything that can trace back to you. Or at least it would be way more difficult for them to ever trace it back to you.
Yeah, and the cycle tracking analogy is a great example of unfettered access to our data and what that means, and how we might consider the apps and things that we use every day to be, not that important. And it's just this silly thing that I have. I just use this map, service that tracks me all the time, and who really cares? But then, once you start realizing how much data it's collecting about you, and that profile that it's creating about you, and then how it's advertising to you because of it, it does start to become this invasive feeling of, now I know that this app, for example, with this case, she wasn't sharing that information with Facebook. She was sharing that information with this app. And now we all know, and she knows that app was sharing that information with Facebook, that was happening. And these are the kinds of things that we don't understand, because the services aren't very transparent, and they're difficult to track, and they don't want to give the information. And even when they do give the information, it's a very confusing, long list of things that we don't understand, because usually they're packaged up and bought and sold by companies that are then selling those, ad tracking packages to other people. So it's a very complicated process. So with
there's another really good one. This one is just super interesting. I like how they do it, because maps are another example where, like, in order to use Google Maps, they bug you to sign in. Apple Maps doesn't identify you based on your Apple ID, but also if you use directions, for example, like if I leave here and I go to Lori's house, it will not record where I left from and not record where I'm going, and then break the trip up into segments and throw away random segments. So it actually has no idea of the trip that I took, but it can still look at those segments and get traffic data and congestion data and all those other kinds of construction data, all that other kind of stuff, and use that, because there's enough people traveling that eventually you cover everything. You just don't ever cover everything for everyone, which is where the creepy stuff comes back in.
Right. Yeah. So then when it comes to location tracking, we can specifically talk about Google Maps, because they track everything. If you go to your location tracking page with Google, you can see everything that you've done all the time. It's not just trips you've taken, but you've got little dots all over the place of all the tracking that it's done on you. What's the, when it comes to like app tracking and Safari and things like that, we have some pretty like specific note, like, oh, this is what happens when I'm being tracked. When Google Maps is tracking your location, like what kind of negative impact can that have on me personally? In terms of things like, now I'm getting advertisements and stuff like that.
So I think there's a couple things, and Google will say this, like they'll say that like this data is not used for advertising. They said that when they bought Fitbit. We're not going to use this data for advertising, but advertising is just an endpoint for their business. It's one of the many things that are powered by all of their algorithms, and those algorithms feed on data, and they need to build those algorithms. So even if they say that your data is not being used to serve you ads, that data is still being used to build up their algorithms. And there's a whole bunch of different things that you want to be careful about. And, like I'm saying this as someone who plays Pokemon Go, and that tracks your location. And that's, if people aren't aware, that's the Google Maps team that made Pokemon Go. Yeah. They left Google Maps under a bunch of controversies, and they were given lots of money, and they formed Niantic, and they made Ingress, and then they made Pokemon Go. But if you look at it, they added a feature called activity sync, where if you're willing to give them, because iOS kept cracking down on location, and you could say just while in the app, and they hated that. So they made a feature where you get extra credit for, like, if you're not playing the game, they'll still give you credit for the distance you walked if you enable always on. And then they got rid of their Apple Watch app at the same time, which did the same thing without giving them access to the data. So now if you want like all the benefits, you're required to give them always access to your location. Mm-hmm. And people are like, oh, I can hatch more eggs. Oh, I'll get higher level rewards. So the whole thing is insidious. But a couple of things is, first, a second location for your data just means there's a second place where your data can be compromised. If someone breaks into my house, they can get my stuff. But if an exact copy of my house exists somewhere else, like in Mountain View, they can break into that too. So it just means that you're doubly exposed. It also means you have to trust everybody that works there, whether or not they'll ever be subpoenaed for data. For example, like, we know Lori's not going to commit a crime, but if she does, they can subpoena the records and say, where was she? And some companies like Apple can say, look, we legitimately don't know. No idea where she was. They can try and get the cell tower records, but Google would have to say, here, she was at the Dairy Queen. She ordered chocolate. We don't know why. We don't know why. So it's not. And we've also seen like cell companies have been selling the stuff to bounty hunters and debt collectors, and so it's something that you have to decide as a person whether you're comfortable with someone else having that fine, detailed, persistent information about you.
Yeah. There's when it comes to location tracking, I turn it off for almost everything. If it literally needs it, then I have it turned to only when you're using the app. I don't think I have anything set to always on. Oh, that's not true. I have a tile tracker set to always on, which tile is an example of it's a beacon tracker. It literally has to be on at all times in order for it to work, because if you lose the thing that the tile is attached to, you lose the ability to find it if you don't have it turned on. But that also leads to questions about my privacy with Tile, because that's one app that is always tracking me. It's always tracking my Bluetooth Tile wherever it is. So are they sharing my data with someone? I do think about that. I've chosen to turn it on, but it does bring up those kind of privacy questions for me of, what does it mean that they're tracking everywhere that I'm walking, and are they sharing that information with someone else? Because there is definitely, the skeptic in me is always considering, why did you make this Bluetooth tracker? Did you make this Bluetooth tracker because you truly believe that people need a way to find things that get lost? Or did you recognize that there's a lot of money to be made in sharing my tracking data with somebody else? Because that's where the money is at. And I think we're all starting to realize now, and we're silly if we don't believe it, that like our data is where the money is at. So those free apps that we download and we use, they're free because they're making money off of us in other ways, So it's definitely becoming more. So people are more aware of that now than they have been before.
Yeah, totally. We're all data billionaires.
Yes, and yet we're when it comes to our data. Yeah, we're raining data. So let's talk a little bit about Safari. The Safari actually has an incredible amount of data protection going on with it. Let's see, what's a good one to specifically talk about? Let's talk about the fingerprinting defense. So according to Apple's privacy page, Safari works to prevent advertisers and websites from using the unique combination of characteristics of your device to create a fingerprint to track you. What does that mean, Renee? This idea of this fingerprint of me when it comes to my web browsing experience.
So, one of the things that I really like about what Apple's doing is there's a bunch of nefarious ways that companies have been trying to get around. So first, they created location. Companies started tracking location. So Apple tried to kill location. Then they invented other stuff. So I'm going to go on a tangent for a second. In iOS 13, you'll get a pop-up saying this app wants to use Bluetooth. And you'll look at it and you go, really? Why does the TV show app want to use Bluetooth? Why does Amazon's shopping app want to use Bluetooth? All these apps that have no connection to Bluetooth because they don't, and they might say, oh, it's to send audio. No, that's a system setting. It's because there are beacons that they can use to try to figure out where you are, even if you turn location. So like you turned off location when I'm not using the app, but they're like, haha, you just pinged that beacon. We now know where you are, Lori Gill. So another way that they would try to get data when Apple started shutting down the amount of data that they were willing to provide was called fingerprinting. And that means that you would go to a website and it would say, oh, you have these fonts installed, for example. And then that would go to the ad network. And then you go to another website and they go, oh, this font list is the same. And there were a few settings that they would check to see. It would be not perfect, but with a combination of enough things, you could have a pretty good idea if someone was the same person. And they would put them together and say, oh, this must be Lori Gill, even though she's like in incognito mode and ad blocking, and Apple's refusing to give us the ad token that we put in the other one, and the cookies have been deleted. It still looks like the same computer to us. Must be Lori Gill. So Apple's now providing a generic profile. So no matter which website you go to, instead of it saying, Lori has Avenir Pro Rose installed, that must be her. It's just going to be the generic font list. It's going to be the generic settings, all of those things. So there's no sort of unique information for them to key off of and try to identify you through.
So in terms of just general web browsing, Safari is so much more privacy driven than any other web browser that it's kind of mind blowing how protected we are in terms of how much Apple in the back end with Safari is trying to protect us, because nothing is ever going to be completely secure and private. But they just have things in place to protect us as best as they can, which is really impressive to me. I think when I was reading the privacy stuff, I was really impressed with Safari's just what it does in the background to try to make sure that a browsing profile is not created by me to the best of its abilities. Whereas, something like Chrome, and I don't mean to keep bashing on one particular company, but Chrome, you're asked to sign in. What for? Like, I get that, like, that's a way to, save your settings and remember your history and things like that. But I don't need that in Safari. So I shouldn't need that in any other web browser that I use. Like, that's an insane request to ask me to collect all of my browsing data in one place that I've actually signed into. So there's, absolute confirmation that it's me. It's not even like a fingerprint that it might be me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Firefox does a pretty good job, but both Firefox and Apple get paid billions of dollars by Google to make Google their default search engine, which is not my favorite thing either. I think they should both on startup ask you if you want Google, which is objectively best. It's the best in the industry, or DuckDuckGo because you care about privacy more and you're willing to put up with not as good search. It means it's not as good. It's not as good, but also not as fully featured. But it's private, and that might be more important to some people, but is billions and billions of dollars. But you're absolutely right. And Google is so incessant. I'm logged in to Google right now, to Chrome, because I use it for work. So my work account is logged in because we use Google accounts for our jobs, but it still wants me to sign into Chrome. And when I say no, it turns my work avatar into a cupcake. And basically, and it's so hard to fix it. Like, it starts breaking everything because it's so frustrating. And they're also doing more and more things that are sort of quirky Chrome things that developers will support because they have to, because it's Chrome. But to me, it's Internet Explorer all over again. They're basically making their version of ActiveX. And now there's some sites that Safari doesn't work great on. Microsoft Edge, which I think was a terrible decision for the internet, not for them. I mean, for them, whatever. But it was really disappointing. They've switched to using the Chromium engine. And that means that, and they did it because they want to make those god-awful Electron apps work better, and those are terrible apps. So it's like it's a shame now. Firefox is still going strong, and bless them for it. But we are really step by step allowing Google to carve the internet up into, and Google, the company that keeps saying how open they are and gets all the neckbeards and hippies and granola crunchers to support them because they're so open. Really, no, you got to always follow the money, and the money is in them making the web more and more to suit Google, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're open, and that I think is what they benefit the most from that, from being that open, because they have more that they can take from people by being that open. So yeah.
It's a business strategy. Every company keeps proprietary what makes them money. Like Google Search is proprietary, their algorithms are proprietary, their Google Play services are proprietary, and they make open what hurts their competitors. Like Apple's Safari is open because they had to beat Microsoft back in the day. So every company does it. You just can't treat any of them as though they're doing some sort of social good experiment.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see, what's some more good things about private? Oh, actually, let's talk a little bit about sign in with Apple, which Apple does talk about it on their privacy page, but I do find it to have been castrated before it was even let out of the ring. And so let's talk a little bit about it. If just in case anyone doesn't know what sign in with Apple is, we'll just do a quick rundown of it. It's a way that you can protect your own personal email and things like that by not signing in with Facebook, not signing in with Google, and not even signing in with your own email address. You can use sign in with Apple, and that creates a special private email address that these companies don't have access to. It started out as this incredibly wonderful privacy thing that gave us a lot of control over who gets our email addresses and what they do with our information. Turns out it's a lot harder to get that going. So Apple kind of pulled back on that. It's not mandatory. It's now opt-in, and I believe it's also backed off a little bit about on what specifically the features are. Do you know a little bit more about the way sign in with Apple works now, Renee, compared to what it was when they announced it?
Yeah, I think functionally it's identical. The difference is that there were some edge cases that they hadn't considered, or at least hadn't disclosed when they first announced it. And there are things like, for example, the Gmail app. The Gmail app shouldn't have to have sign in with Apple as an option because it's a Google app, and offering sign in with Google makes sense there. So that sort of thing should be an exception. Shouldn't be forced to put sign in with Apple there. And there are also some apps that really aren't public. They're on there because they serve specific business purposes, for example. And like Mobile Nations, we use Google. So if we made a Mobile Nations app, it's fine that it just supports Google. It shouldn't have to support sign in with Apple because it wouldn't be meaningful. It wouldn't give us access to all the backend data that comes with Google. So I think they're fine tuning that part. And also it's a little bit of effort for, an indie developer can always turn this stuff around in a day, but it seems to take the big corporations a year and a half to even look at the spec for the implementation.
They're busy doing other things.
They're busy not implementing features is what it feels like most of the time. So they've deferred some of it to early next year, again, just to better handle those edge cases, and also to make sure that the companies have sufficient time to implement it.
We will hopefully still see that sort of full, rich privacy sign in with Apple, hopefully sometime next year. And it will be mandatory at that point?
It should be mandatory for any normal app that also allows Google and Facebook login. If they have their own cockamamie login scheme, they don't need to add it. But if they do offer Google and Facebook, they're supposed to offer Apple as well.
Okay, so even though it exists now, it just kind of exists in a shorter sphere or smaller sphere, and that will grow over time. So that's one of those examples of Apple announcing something and then taking their time to get it in, which actually segues into something else that I want to talk about. But before we move on to a different subject, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Thrifter. Did I do it good, Renee?
Yes.
Why don't you hop on over to Thrifter for me real quick? So
I'm gonna do that.
Black Friday is coming soon. It's only a couple of weeks away. And actually, Black Friday is no longer just one day. It's now not even just a week, but it's pretty much a month. So there's already sales going on right now. And Thrifter is the place to go to find those Black Friday deals. So you can hop on over to thrifter.com to get all of the information that you need to get you ready for Black Friday and even get those early Black Friday sales. Renee, do you see anything available now that looks like it might even be a Black Friday early special?
I mean, there's $80 off an Apple Watch Series 5, which is pretty damn good.
That is a good looking one. I'm seeing that there's an iPhone 11 that is free with a trade-in at Sprint. So this is pretty good. If you sign up if you sign a new line up with Sprint's Flex Lease and trade in your old smartphone in any condition, you'll get an iPhone 11 for $0 a month. That's the brand new iPhone, everybody. So holiday season comes around, and maybe you're trying to get a new iPhone for your partner, or maybe you're trying to get a new iPhone for the kids. $0 a month is a pretty good price to pay. All you have to do is send in your old not working iPhone anyway. So that's a pretty good deal that Thrifter has found and put on their site. Whether it's something that's, it shows up everywhere, it's, everyone knows about the trade-in offer, or if it's, an obscure, I had no idea there was a sale like this going on. It's all right there on Thrifter on the home page. Everything that you could possibly want, you can find. There's deals. Some of them have special codes. Some of them are, only available if you, sign in at a certain time and use a special code. They have all that information at thrifter.com. Again, you can head on over to thrifter.com to get all of the deals and sales for Black Friday. I highly suggest, if you want to be ahead of the game, sign up with Thrifter's newsletter. They're going to be sending out great newsletters that really focus on the best ways to shop on Black Friday, where to find the best deals, how to not get tricked into a deal that actually isn't good, because there's a lot of retailers that'll do something like hike the price of a product and then, mark it 50% off when it's really actually only, 12% off or something like that. So they've got all those kind of tips and tricks and how to navigate Black Friday in the best way. So again, thrifter.com. Thank you so much, Thrifter, for sponsoring this week's episode of the iMore Show. So I wanted to segue in to we've talked about this a few times recently, Renee, especially after iOS 13 came out, where Apple announced a bunch of features at WWDC that we are all expecting, and then we didn't get them in iOS 13. They just weren't ready. They weren't baked. So they held off to iOS 13.2. And in some cases, we might even not see some things until 13.3 or later. But the backlash of Apple not delivering on that, I wouldn't call it a promise, but just, to say it in simple terms, not delivering on that promise, gave people a bad impression of, what Apple's doing. So to segue that, we just on, was it Wednesday or Thursday? I don't remember for sure. Photoshop for iPad came out. So this has been something that Adobe's been talking about for well over a year. I can't even remember the first time I heard this. It might have even been 2 years ago that they talked about real Photoshop for your iPad. And that's what we all wanted, was real Photoshop for your iPad. And it came out, and it's actually missing quite a few features. It's actually great. There's a lot of people that have a lot of great things to say about it. I don't use Photoshop, so I'm not going to make any kind of review or comparison. Renee, you might be able to talk a little bit about what you personally think of it. But there was backlash because it didn't come with everything. And there was also, shortly after, maybe the next day, Adobe's... Sorry, I'm pulling up his name right now because I don't remember it. So it was Adobe's Chief Product Officer, Scott Belsky, came out on Twitter to kind of actually apologize for the marketing of it and kind of recognizing, the strategy maybe should have been done a little different. And one thing he specifically said that I thought was interesting is that people wanted, I'm looking for the exact wording, but, here we go. We didn't do a good enough job distinguishing between real, the actual real code base. So any PSDs can be managed with any number of layers and people can use between iPad and desktop, and full, which is every feature that's on the desktop version on day one. So what he's saying is that they were sort of marketing it in such a way that we thought it was going to be literally desktop Photoshop on your iPad, and that's just not what happened, and that disappointed a lot of people. Renee, have you had some time with Photoshop on iPad? Do you have any opinions on how well it came out?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to push back on Adobe on that. I think they did an okay job. I think the media wasn't great. Like we knew from the beginning, and I said over and over again, it is real, it is not full. They are bringing the Photoshop engine to the iPad. They are not bringing all the features. They are bringing a small subset of features. Said it on Mac Break Weekly, said it on this show, said it on my video show over and over again. I don't think a lot of media outlets covered that. And it was told. I watched, maybe that was more briefings. I don't know. As I go back and check the tape, depending on what they said on stage versus what they said in briefings. But in the briefings, they were always really clear. And so I think there was an expectational debt that built up between people. But it's a ridiculous thing. Like even Photoshop shouldn't have all the features that Photoshop has. It's a legacy of them adding things that appeal, like there's for interface design and for photographers and for animators. It serves 8 different masters, and it's not ideal. Like, and everyone has 5 features. Everyone only uses 5 features, but they're all 5 different features. And that's why Adobe's been making all these different apps that do different things, that do prototyping and do UI design and all those things. So I think, maybe they could have screamed it louder. But I think people, I think people created a lot of their own problems with it. And I don't think the media covered it well. And I think it's very different than Apple. Like Apple bit off more than they could chew this year. And I said that previously, like they should have said, this is what is coming over the next year, and then taken that year to release it. Not this is what's coming in September, because there's no way. It's just way too much stuff. Adobe said you are getting real Photoshop, not full Photoshop. And I think it was late. I think it was harder than they thought. I think, people forget that as powerful as the A series chips are, there's not a lot of RAM in these devices, not compared to a computer where there's like certainly not even 8 gigs, let alone 16 or 32 gigs of RAM. That's a tremendous task, and it's miraculous, very talented that they managed to do that. But I think they are only partially responsible for the upset of the customers, and the customers and the media are partly responsible as well.
But they're also saying that there's a lot of features that are coming soon. So I think for me, what I'm looking at is Adobe launched Photoshop for iPad that was even missing some features that they're planning on implementing. And that's that idea of if they would have presented it to us, this is version 1 of Photoshop. It doesn't have everything, but we have a roadmap to get you all of those things. You just got to give us some time and experiment with it. And then, in a few months, we'll have a couple more features. In a few months, we'll have a couple more features after that. I think companies now, it behooves them to clarify to us as the users that it's not all going to be there all at once, because we're all going to pick one feature that we can't wait for. And that's the one thing that we're waiting for. And the one thing that we're angry about when we don't get, and everyone's different. Everyone's ideal feature is different. So for Apple or for Adobe or for anybody to say, these are all coming, but only focus on, let's say with Catalina, for example, to get hyper focused on making sure that, Sidecar works. I was super, super excited about Catalina and Sidecar and iPad OS 13 and Sidecar. And so, they made sure that was available. But then there's some other feature that's a huge deal to someone else that they didn't work on.
Like
and
the HomePod
that person
took until point 2.
Yeah. So, and so that could be, that's a huge disappointment to that person when it wasn't as huge of a disappointment to me. Yeah. So it is, Renee, just like you're saying, it makes so much more sense that when these companies come out and announce these features, instead of saying it's coming in X update or it's coming at X point of time, a generalized roadmap that we're even looking at, we're coming up on, there's a month and a half left in 2000, or slightly more than a month and a half left in 2019, and we still haven't seen a Mac Pro. And though we're more likely to see it this year than we have previously, Apple's been talking about the upcoming release of the new Mac Pro for a
So
while.
that's a weird one, because when they did the iMac 2017 and when they did the Mac Pro 2013, they were very clear that it was by the end of the year. And we all take that to mean December 31st, about 3 minutes to midnight, two of them will come off the assembly line. But with this one, they keep saying fall. And people say technically fall goes until December 21st. Sure, but when Apple says fall for iOS, we all know that means September. And I think
Yeah.
that makes people confused into thinking the Mac Pro is coming. It's like, so like, just if you're going to standardize on like cute little colloquial dating, just standardize on the cute little colloquial dating. Like if you say just say by the end of the year, no one's going to care. But if you say the fall, it just means something different to people.
Yeah. So in the case of Mac Pro, though, it's clear that they're just wanting to make sure they get it right before they put it out to the public. So they're doing us solid by making us wait, but they're also making us wait. Like, is there a better way? Should Apple be kind of giving us updates? Like when September came around and we didn't see the Mac Pro, should they have told us it's probably going to be late fall? Or should they said, actually it's probably going to be closer to like Christmas time? Do we need
like a
that kind of
Kickstarter campaign?
yeah, right. Updates on it, even though we didn't, they're not beholden to us. Would that make us feel better as the, lover of Apple products if they were more helpful in our, shopping needs? There's, it obviously with a Mac Pro, it's very niche. It's not going to be like people like you and me. If my MacBook Pro crashes, I'm not going to go buy a Mac Pro. I'm not, that's not on the table for me. It's going to be whether or not I replace my MacBook Pro with another MacBook Pro. But it is all kind of part of that same thing of would it benefit us and would it benefit Apple if they were a little bit better at letting us know what's to come? For example, we can kind of segue now into the potential for a 16-inch MacBook Pro that we hear strong rumors about, but we still haven't heard any word about. So if Apple said, you know what, there's no MacBook Pro in 2019, new MacBook Pro in 2019. I know there already was one earlier this year, but for the end of the year, there's no 16-inch MacBook Pro till through the entirety of 2019. Would that be better for us or worse for us?
So I want to backtrack for a second, because I think you made some good points about Adobe as well. And the launch was really weird because the app showed up sort of out of nowhere. They hadn't got any reviews lined up. They didn't set up anybody to review it, which is usually a bad sign, because like usually the app would go up and a bunch of reviews would go live at the same time. And I don't think they knew that the app was live when it was live. So that all was a bit of a cluster. With Apple, I think it's better for them to keep it nebulous, because the more they update us, it gives them more chance to blow deadlines. So if they said, yeah, the Mac Pro is coming in September, and then it's not ready, like, you said September, you bastards.
Yeah.
And so they say, but that's again why I think saying end of the year, because even if it comes out in October or November now, that's a nice surprise, because I'm only thinking about December 31st. But if it comes out December 31st, like, oh, that's what I figured, whatever. I'm not going to say go boomer. I'm not going to do it. Or okay, boomer. But I think in general, like there's a danger to being specific in that it's better to underpromise and overdeliver. Like, they don't talk about those products because they don't, like, maybe a component won't show up in time, or maybe they'll go just a few weeks after it makes sense for them to sell it, and then they've told you it's coming, and all of a sudden they know that if they release it in January or February instead of like December, the week of December 23rd, they'll make like 800 times more sales. And now they've already said it's coming this year, so they have to put it out in December 20. Like it creates problems for them to manage. And for things they've announced, like when they announced AirPower, and they had to say they're not shipping it, that's a black eye, which is why I think they didn't announce AirPods Pro in September. They just shut up and shipped it. And I think that's in general a better model. It is worse for people who are like, can I buy a new Mac Pro now? Can I buy a new Mac Pro now? Because you're always waiting, and like, I survived October, but there are still rumors, and I need a new Mac Pro, and but there's no guarantees that way either. It just means that you'll wait, and then Apple says it's not ready. It's going to take another 3 months, and I still really need a Mac Pro. Apple's a jerk again for being late with it.
Right.
So I think in general, on some, it's still better to shut up and ship in almost all cases.
I keep thinking of when an iPhone comes out, and the iPad for that matter, we know ahead of time. They tell us, what day it's going to ship. and we are excited about it, and we get to pre-order it, and it ships on the day they say that it's going to ship. Obviously, they've made sure that when the time comes that they're ready for it. I love that feeling. I love knowing that there's an exact date to expect it. And
but it's super short term. It's not like it's 3 months from now. It's like in a week, in 2 weeks.
Right. But we know for sure every year there's going to be a new iPhone in September. If Apple didn't launch a new iPhone in September, if they waited until October just randomly, I think their stock would drop just because that's what we're used to. But they don't do that with any of their other products, not even with an iPad. I guess Apple Watch and iPhone are probably the two things that are stable, but I wouldn't even put my money on Apple Watch because there's a chance that they wouldn't. But with iPhone, every year in September, that happens. And I would love to see that. I would love to see, every year in October, it's a Mac and an iPad. Every year in March, it's
Maybe
an iPad, let's say.
It'll be better because they've been so burned by just Intel not having chipsets ready over the last 3 and 4 years that they've had all these products that were supposed to ship and got delayed or got canceled because they didn't fit in the product matrix. Once they control all of that, I think it'll be easier. But I think it'll end up still being like on an iPad Pro schedule where the iPad Pro is updated about like every 18 months, not every year. But they fully control that device so they can make all those decisions.
Yeah.
With Intel, it's like Apple said on their conference call, what was it, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, we would have sold more Macs, but Intel just can't get us the chips.
Yeah. It's not our fault, in other words. Yeah. Is there going to be a 16-inch MacBook Pro? I mean, we're coming down to the wire now. I really did think if it was happening, it would happen in October, even if it was October 31st. And now, we're through the first week of the first week of November. This as of right now, we are in the holiday shopping season, which is when it makes the most sense for Apple to launch something like this. What is it going to happen? Are we going to get it?
So I had this whole thing about Macs, and I think that Apple blew a lot of their credibility with the Mac community by not regularly updating Macs. Like the Mac Mini and the MacBook Air were years between updates, and I think you can't do that. You can't, and they just sat there, the old versions, and the old Mac Pro, until the new one was announced, it was just on those shelves for years. And I think everything I said about Intel still being true. I think you have to update those products every year. They did update the regular MacBook Pro already. So there's sort of, I can't say as much about the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I'd love to have it, but I don't feel the pressure on there. And same with the iMac Pro was released in 2017. It's still using Skylake Xeon. And the Mac Mini was released last year. It's not on Kaby Lake refresh. And is it Kaby Lake? I'm losing track of what Intel's chipsets are. I think it's Kaby Lake refresh. It's something refresh. Same with the Mac Mini. It's on Whiskey Lake, Ice Lake. It's on one of the lakes, and there's a newer lake. Like I want that newer lake, and it's not so much that I want it, but I think that anybody who goes to buy one should always have the most up-to-date, best version of that product possible. So they're going to buy a Mac Mini, and newer chips are available. Those newer chips should be in there. Same with the MacBook Air.
It's a little bit similar to when you buy a new iPhone. Like when iPhone SE came out, even though I bought one, it was disappointing to me that it didn't have the most current A chip. And that's kind of the same idea of if I go in right now to buy a new iMac, let's say, what is the chipset on the latest iMac? How long has that one been since it was updated? Just the standard iMac, not the iMac Pro.
I think in March or I think in the spring they updated those. So those ones I'm okay
so
with.
That was pretty good.
I want them all updated, and the MacBook Pro got those, but I want them all updated.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think we don't expect our Mac computers to be, new designs with all new interiors. We don't mind that Apple just pushes out a chipset update. We're fine with that, and we should be given that. And so, in the case of the MacBook Pro, Renee, you're right. Like why do it now when, they just did it in May? Let's wait until, the next spring when, there's a new chipset to go inside of it. And that is, unless they're going to be completely redesigning it and they're going to give us a 16-inch MacBook Pro, in which case that's a big deal and deserves a lot of fanfare. So,
and they've been really aggressive. Like they put out new MacBook Pros last year, and then they put out better graphics for them. Like right afterwards, people were like, "Ah, you bastards!" And then like the spring, they put out better CPUs with the graphics cards. Like, "Ah, you jerks!" But I'd much rather have that problem than have the "Oh, come on, where's my stuff" problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's just the nature of technology, that different things are going to get different additions, and it's better for us as consumers that a new version of each one of these Mac products, they just come out when the new technology comes out, instead of waiting a year and then compiling all of the new technology into one. Just put them out as they happen, so that whoever's buying the latest MacBook Pro gets whatever the latest technology is in that computer that day that they bought it, and they can feel good about that. Even if 3 months later something new comes along, at that moment, that was the latest and greatest of the what was available in technology. Yeah.
And if you're going to keep it for 5 years, you're keeping the best you possibly could for those 5 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is definitely, a big deal, to make sure when it comes to buying computers that you're buying something that is going to last you a really long time, for sure.
Yeah.
So with this week, so we did talk a little bit about whether or not Apple was going to announce. I just want to call attention to, this has kind of been it's kind of spreading its wings around the internet right now. The FCPX Creative Summit. They've been marketing their conference as Apple is going to be, or there's going to be some surprises from the Apple product team. And it's very funny to me that right now we're so hyper focused on whether or not a Mac is going to come out that people are questioning whether or not they're going to announce a new Mac at this this summit, this creative summit from Final Cut Pro. So what do you think? Do you think the Final Cut Pro Professionals Summit or the FCPX Creative Summit is going to have a new Mac come out suddenly today or tomorrow?
So. I think didn't they do their keynote yesterday and we didn't hear anything from it? I don't remember the exact dates.
Yeah, that's true. But the summit goes through the 9th, so maybe they're going to surprise us tomorrow.
Yeah, I think if there is anything, I would love it. It would be a new version of Final Cut Pro, because they've been doing a lot of updates, but there's still updates that they could do around the raw workflow, for example, or better support for non-16:9 aspect ratios. There's a bunch of things. Snapping objects would be fantastic. The way that you can do it in iWork, for example, like I bring a title down, it snaps to the edge, it snaps to the other title, all those sorts of things. There's a lot of stuff I'd love to see from Final Cut, and I think that would be a great show to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure what they've got going on. I have not been following that summit, but there's some great new features that they could be announcing and rolling out. We recently, excuse me, in the state of California, to get hyper focused on my locale, over the past few years, the prices of homes, rentals, and mortgages has just skyrocketed. It's insane how much the price of things have gone up. Even for me, I live 100 some miles away from what you would call Silicon Valley, where all of the tech money is. And we're in California, as a general population, we blame the tech industry for why the housing prices have gone up, because there's a lot of people that are moving into Northern California that can afford more expensive houses, and that kind of raises things up, and it has trickled over to all the way into Sacramento. So in part to try to alleviate the problem that is the housing crisis, the cost of living going up so exponentially, where any tech company has built its home, not just California, not just with Apple, but Google and Microsoft and things like that. They're also facing sort of blowback from the locals saying, you've this is partly your fault. I don't completely agree with that, but I do see that the tech companies have made it easy for people to have a lot of money to live in these areas, and that has pushed out people who don't make as much money. So Apple announced that it is going to be it's not donating, but they're committing $2.5 billion to help with the California housing crisis. Their money consists of $1 billion that's going to go directly to affordable housing, an affordable housing investment fund. $1 billion will go to first-time homebuyer mortgage assistance funds. They're going to send $300 million. They're going to have $300 million worth of Apple-owned and available land to build affordable housing, which to me is actually their best donation. All of this is good, but land is actually a problem, and so the fact that they've got land in there is that's good. And $150 million going directly to the Bay Area Housing Fund, and $50 million to support vulnerable populations throughout California. So this is it's a big deal, and it's also something that the other tech companies are helping out with too. Renee, how do you feel about, number one, the blaming of tech companies for why there's a housing crisis, and number two, throwing money at it as being the fixer to the problem? And I'm positing it that way specifically for a reason, which we can talk about in a minute.
So I don't know enough about California in specific, because there's been this has been the source of controversy and limitless articles for the last decade, the housing crisis in California. And some people say it's because they won't allow a new building. They won't allow them. Other cities are building so many more units, and California is refusing, or the people in the communities in California are refusing. And some are saying it's because their housing prices are so high, they don't want to lose that. Other people are saying they're trapped in their housing prices, or all their investment is their housing prices, and they're terrified that they'll go lower. It seems like a complete mess where humans are put at the bottom of the scale of reasons why or why not things are getting done. I don't mind Apple or any company throwing money at it. I think having more money is always better than having less money. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that you can fully blame. I mean, they started there. Like Apple started in Jobs's garage. This is just where they've always been. And Google was Stanford graduates. I mean, Zuckerberg moved there. He should have been screwing up New York, not or wherever he was. He was at Harvard, right? He should have been screwing up Harvard. But maybe he's a native to there too. I don't remember the Aaron Sorkin biopic well enough. But there happens to be a confluence of tech companies there and their employees, and it's meeting really constrained housing, and it's a huge problem, and it needs to be solved. And I don't think yelling about how we're solving it is nearly as helpful as figuring out more and better ways to solve it. Yeah.
So when I first read about this, I thought two things. I thought this is fantastic because there's a lot of problems that have to do with the housing crisis and people that just can't afford to live in a 1-bedroom apartment for $2,500 a month. And I'm not exaggerating on the price. I think that in some cases it's even higher in the Bay Area. That's just, you can't do that. And if just because you work in the tech industry doesn't mean that, that the rest of the, like, what about the teachers that, the median income for a teacher is something like, 35 or 40,000 or something like that. So how are they handling, living in the Bay Area and teaching in the Bay Area when the prices are going up so high and the cost of living is going up so high? So it's a very frustrating thing for me to see and to be a part of. Like, I still rent. I will not be able to buy a home if I want to live in California. I just don't see how I'll ever be able to afford it at this point. Maybe if I was smart enough and I would have bought a house 20 years ago or 15 years ago, I'd have been okay. But now today, I don't see myself ever being able to afford to buy a home in California. That's my future, is that I won't be able to buy. But there is something to be said for the great altruisticness. And again, the skeptic in me would say it's just marketing. It's just to make you look good. But I disagree with that. I think that when these tech companies, because Apple's not the only one that's doing it, there's other tech companies involved in the same kind of trying to help with the housing crisis by adding money to different funds. we're not doing it ourselves, and they have, the financial ability to kind of like put some extra money into those pots. So that's always good. That's always going to be helpful. And the reason I kind of tossed it out there as a Apple trying to just throw money at the problem is that Bernie Sanders actually has a problem with this, and he called it hypocrisy, and he thinks that companies like Apple should start paying their fair share in taxes, which again is another sort of misinterpretation of the term, or sort of not really being clear and truthful and honest about that, because Apple does pay what they're supposed to in taxes. They do things that make it so that they don't have to pay as much taxes here in the US, but they're not cheating on their taxes. They just, like all corporations, they do other things to help alleviate the tax pressure. So it's just interesting to see that something so to me, it seems like such an altruistic thing for a company they didn't have to do that. There's nobody telling them they have to do that. They did this. They decided that they were going to donate, or they're going to supply $2.5 billion to various housing funds, including some of their land, which is a huge deal. And for somebody to kind of turn around and like poo-poo on it as like, well, you should be doing more, and if you were paying your taxes all along, what Sanders is saying is like paying your taxes all along, this wouldn't be an issue. I disagree with this. I think Renee, you had kind of pointed to it, which is the problem with housing goes so much deeper than how many people have moved to this town. It has a lot to do with whether or not the city itself and the ordinances allow for additional housing. Because here in Sacramento, I can definitely say that if there were more places to build, the cost of living wouldn't be as high. We're restricted by, and we're nothing compared to San Francisco in terms of density. But even here, if there were more houses being built, then it wouldn't be quite as hard for me to afford to buy a home, because the housing prices wouldn't keep rising. They would level out because there would be enough housing available. And that's where we're seeing a lot of those kind of issues. And it goes beyond, whether or not the corporations are committing certain billions of dollars, whether or not they're meeting their tax. I have plenty of political opinions about corporations and their taxes, but in this particular scenario, I think I don't think Sanders did a good job of really kind of positioning his statements, and I think Apple has done a good job. Kudos to them, I think, for doing what they're doing right now. And again, kudos to Google and Microsoft for that too, because I know any big corporation, it's good for all of us if they're able to, help take care of something like that, even though we can't blame them for why the housing crisis is there. I think we all recognize that it's because of their success that we're seeing more people moving into the state of California too.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately they're citizens of California, and they need to solve the problem for their own employees and for themselves and for their kids and for their grandparents. I mean, it is in their best interest to help solve the problem. I love Bernie Sanders because he's from Vermont, and that makes him an honorary Canadian. But the U.S. and I know you're an American lawyer. I don't mean to besmirch all Americans with this, but the U.S. has an almost unique view of economics in the world. I think the U.S. and Eritrea in Africa are the only two countries that want citizens not living in the country to still pay taxes based on their income earned in other countries. And so there's a bunch of Canadians who every year have to go and file tax returns for the US or for Eritrea, but at least that's a 2% flat tax in Eritrea. And to me, that's ridiculous, because if I went to America and worked, I would not owe the Canadian government anything. If you work in UK, you've got to pay taxes in America. If you're a UK person working in America, you don't owe the UK government anything. And I think that's a tremendous overreach on the part of the US government. And I think the same is true of corporations. What Bernie Sanders is largely talking about is repatriation of taxes. He's saying that these taxes are being kept overseas. They're not. Like, it's not like Apple or these companies are taking money out of the US, moving it overseas and saying, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, you can't tax us. This is money earned outside the US. Now, there is all sorts of shenanigans going on outside the US, like the Irish tax shelter and all those things. And those, those are ways of dodging taxes. And I think those should stop. But that tax money should then not go back to the US. That tax money should go to the countries where that money is being generated, earned, spent, and transacted. So like, if that's Spanish money, it should go to Spain. If that's German money, it should go to Germany. The US should absolutely get all the taxes they deserve from money that is generated in the US. But everyone else should get to keep the money that they are making too. And the US should not be allowed to double tax. Again, there's only like 2 countries in the world that do that. But the other thing is where I think there's a bigger problem is that these companies get given such big tax breaks in the US. It's like they're falling over each other to give them billions of dollars to build their headquarters in Texas. Or like Amazon was like, oh, beauty pageanting. Who's going to give us the most money to build? No, you should go there and give them money to allow you to put your stupid headquarters there. If we didn't give them $2 billion in tax breaks, we would have $2 extra billion to spend on the housing. So like, I would much rather that someone like Bernie Sanders or someone who is, politically woke, complain less about that and work more towards eliminating those sorts of tax breaks and constraining U.S. taxation to inside the U.S. Sorry, I didn't mean to rant about that. But
you basically said it all. You said a lot of what I feel, and I agree with you 100%. And I think that Bernie Sanders might have just been sort of hyper focusing on this particular incident, but I think his general platform is exactly what you're talking about, which is, kind of closing those tax loopholes so that companies are paying taxes in the US the way they should be and not getting those tax breaks that they get. And just like you're saying, that sort of like corporate welfare of being invited into a state. And one of those conditions a lot of times is that they don't have to pay taxes in that state for X number of years at all. That's just that's the gift that state is giving to that corporation in order to move in. So those are some examples of like that. That's not, that doesn't help anybody. That just makes things worse, especially when you see
they imagine
the housing
that they're going to
crisis
spend so much money there that it's going to more than make up for it, but it never seems to.
No,
it never seems to.
Yep. So that is a interesting way to end our program, but we've actually gone over by about 10 minutes, and I don't want to keep us here that much longer. So, Renee, I had a wonderful discussion with you today about Apple privacy and all the other fun things that we talked about. Vector is just going strong. I definitely want everybody to go check it out. Renee and I had a great discussion about AirPods Pro recently. So hop on over to youtube.com/Vector to check out all of his shows, especially the couple that he's brought up this week. Renee, if people want to chat you up on the internets, is there a great way for them to find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Renee Ritchie on all the social things, imore.com/Vector for my words, and youtube.com/Vector for my moving pictures.
Yes. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me at Appaholic on Twitter, and of course at imore.com, where I'll be writing all the things relating to Black Friday. It's coming up because it's coming up. We're ready for it. If Georgia Dow were here, Renee, help me out with all of her handles. You could find her on Twitter at Georgia_Dow, but she doesn't go on the Twitters all that often.
Nope.
You could also find her at
Anxiety-Videos.
Yes, at Anxiety-Videos, where if you have anxiety about shopping, maybe you can visit that website and get some helpful tips on how to control and manage your anxiety. Thanks to all of our listeners that are listening right now that weren't there in attendance for our show live. And thanks to all of you who have been watching us live and listening to all the things we've been blathering on about. It was great to see you in our live feed. And we do record this program live on YouTube on Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So if you just bookmark your calendar and go to our website at youtube.com/iMore show. I actually don't know what our YouTube handle is. Anyway, you can search for us and find us on Twitter because we announce it a couple minutes before every time. And thanks again to Jim Metzendorf for making us all sound so wonderful. You work so hard for us, and we love all of the things that you do. And thanks again. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Yay. Thank you, Lori Gill.